Welcome to Connections, a podcast from the Graymere Church of Christ in Columbia, Tennessee. Our goal is to have discussions and messages that encourage us and strengthen our faith. We appreciate you joining us. Let's keep learning and growing together. Thank you for joining us for Connections. We like to have conversations that hopefully are spiritually encouraging and uplifting to you, and we hope that you'll share this with someone else and subscribe and all those things. We're really getting a lot of feedback about the podcast, and we appreciate that. I'm excited that we have with us Michael Miller, who is no stranger to our Graymere Church family, and we're thankful that he's joining us. We're going to be talking about Bible study and trying to share some really practical ideas and practical helps. But I'll start off just by letting you kind of introduce yourself. A lot of people obviously will know you and your family, but just on the off chance someone doesn't, tell us a little bit about yourself.
So, of course, I'm Michael Miller. I've been at Graymere since the end of 2019, start of 2020. Been a Christian since I was about 18 years old, and I am very passionate about Bible study.
Awesome. And another note for Graymere members is that your youth minister was John David Schwartz.
That's right. I taught him everything he knows.
That's right. So all the wisdom you've heard JD share about youth ministry was learned at the feet of Michael Miller. But one of the things that we've discussed, I know you've done a lot of study, you've taken a lot of courses, done a lot of coursework on the graduate level, and taught a lot for us here. But tell us a little bit about just your own kind of history with studying the Bible, your own experiences, and kind of maybe some things you've learned along the way.
Yeah. So, of course, as I said, I became a Christian about 18 or so, and I really, I guess, started studying my Bible maybe around 15 or 16, and I think at different phases of learning Scripture, it looks differently. And at the time, it was, I guess, more of having favorite verses and meditating on those verses and how those could apply to your life, but not really Scripture as a whole. And I guess there was a time, probably I was about 25 or so, where I really fell in love with the Bible and fell in love with Scripture. And a lot of that had to do with, I guess, somewhat of a magical moment in my life. And again, I was 25 years old, which is probably a lot later than some for having this realization, but realizing that the Bible, from the first page to the last page, is a unified story. You know, I think before that, it was, snippets of a story here and these stories here, but not realizing that they intertwined. And I guess it was a point, about that time that for the probably 1,000th time, I'd set out to read the Bible through, and failed all 1,000 times before that. And so I started in Genesis 1, and I remember getting to the end of Genesis. And, again, like you move into Exodus and we realize like the Jewish people are in Egypt. And before that, viewing Scripture as these individual snippets, I guess I never questioned, well, why are they in Egypt? And moving through Genesis and getting to the end and realizing that, oh, it was Joseph. Yeah. It was the Joseph narrative. That's why they were in Egypt, and realizing, just connecting those two pieces, I guess in a way made me hungry to realize, like, well, what other pieces do I have that I'm not connecting here? Yeah. And that was kind of, I guess that was the start of realizing, like, wow, this is a beautiful story and so deep and majestic in so many different ways.
Yeah. And I think I can certainly relate to that too, the idea of finding connections and seeing things. And I just wonder, I wonder why it is that we're tempted to lose sight of that. You know, I don't know if it's because maybe we get caught up in studying a specific passage or a specific book, but it is really easy to forget that context. And so just kind of following up on that, when you made that connection, it sounds like there was something that really changed, like just in the way you thought about Scripture. Did that kind of shape your approach going forward of just like, hey, I'm trying to, now that I've seen this connection, I'm trying to find others and trying to see that whole story? Or was that kind of a longer process?
Yeah, I mean, I guess it was a longer process and probably a little subconscious to a certain extent, but yeah, just trying to figure out like, okay, well, at the time, I guess, like I had a pretty good grasp on like the life of Jesus, the Gospels, and thinking, okay, well, if there was this connection, this hyperlink between Genesis and Exodus, perhaps there's also a hyperlink, a connection between Exodus and Jesus, and just slowly, one by one, putting those together. And as I did move through the Old Testament that year, it was like, I guess in a way, like lightning strike after lightning strike of like putting things together. Oh, well, this is how they got to the nation of Israel. This is how they got to the promised land.
Yeah.
Oh, this is how they got a king. This is, and moving on through there until it was like all those tiny snippets of stories that I had started to come together into a bigger picture.
Yeah. Well, that's awesome. And just as you think about kind of your journey in studying the Bible, what were some things like, was there really good advice that someone gave you along the way? Were there some things that you learned from someone about studying that have really helped that you think about?
Yeah, there were some people that I guess entered into my life around that same time that taught me some things, and I guess in my mind, at the time I thought, well, if you want to know a lot about the Bible, you have to have a Bible degree or whatever, and I think those are very important. Like you've talked about, I've had a lot of graduate level classes. You're highly trained in the Bible, but some of those people that entered my life at that time were not professionally trained, professionally educated people, and they knew their Bible just incredibly well. And it was simply because they opened it up and they read it.
Yeah.
And that made such a big difference. And I think on top of that, some of these same people and surrounding myself with people that weren't afraid to ask the stupid questions, you know, that had that mindset that, I don't care to look uneducated by asking this question.
Yeah.
I just want to feed my curiosity.
Right.
And I think that's a mentality that as a Bible student, we have to have.
Yeah.
And frankly, I think for all of us, there are those questions that we don't ask or we're timid to ask because we think, well, I should already know the answer to that. So instead of asking it, I'll just act like I know what they're talking about instead of being in a conversation with someone that someone says something that you've maybe never heard before or you think is truly novel and just saying, hey, I don't know anything about that. I've never heard of that before. Or honestly, I don't really know why we believe that. Why do we believe that? And just not being afraid of those questions. And one other thing, and I think this is important, and this came from a guy who was a real role model to me, and at this time was a real mentor, I guess, in my biblical studies, a guy named Tim Martin, who I know you know.
Yeah.
And he had this approach that basically, before you can look at Scripture with a microscope, you need to look at it with a telescope. And if to kind of break that down, it's like if I handed you a microscope and I put this piece of dust in the slide and I said, Andrew, I want you to look in the microscope and tell me what you're looking at. You may look in the microscope. I don't know. I mean, maybe that's a piece of dust or dirt. And I said, well, That's a piece of dust from the moon. You're like, well, I'm very surprised at that. I have no idea what moon dust looks like.
Yeah.
But if we get out a telescope and I point the telescope and you can see the overall picture of the moon and you look at it and you say, well, that's the moon. Yeah, I've looked at that. Maybe never so close as this, but I've seen that before.
Yeah.
And then you start to unravel those layers of the moon and how it's held up into the sky and what it's made of and what kind of things are found there. And eventually over time you unravel enough of that and you study enough of that and the intricacies of that now you're ready to get out the microscope and you say, oh yeah, well clearly this is a piece of moon dust, and I think likewise, another analogy of that would be, and I've kind of alluded to puzzle pieces. Remember when I was younger, I've got a sister that's 4 years older than me, and she loved puzzles. And for a while, she would get these puzzles that it was just a box of pieces. There was no picture.
Oh, wow.
There was no, it was just a box of pieces, and you had to get it out. And I always thought she was crazy for that because I'm not as smart as her. So when I do a puzzle, the first thing I do is I take the box and I set it up.
Absolutely.
So I can see the picture and I take it and I say, well, there's a lot of green in this. So maybe let's put all the green pieces over here. And well, there's a big tree in the middle. So maybe I'll work on that tree first. And then there's a car over here. Let's work on the car. And you get these larger sections that are completed, and then eventually those larger sections start to piece together. And you're left with this just hodgepodge of extra pieces that you don't understand where they go. And slowly, one by one, you try and you fit them in. And I think biblical studies are a lot like that, that it's a puzzle. And we have all these pieces in front of us, and it's hard to understand, what do I do with all of these pieces?
Yeah.
But if we can get that big picture, if we can set the box up and then just little by little get the little pieces together that we can, eventually those little pieces start to connect to the bigger pieces. And I think that was a really helpful principle for me to understand that I don't have to understand it all. If I can just understand little pieces, eventually along the long road, those pieces will start to fit together.
Yeah. I love that analogy. I love both of those, the telescope and the microscope. I think that's a great way to describe it. And then looking at the picture, one of the things that I also think helps us is when we think about puzzles, there are going to be some that we're not sure about as we're going through. I'm not sure where this goes here or here. And so for me, it's helpful I know where these go. So let me get what I know down first, and then I can find spots, and I think about that whenever we're tempted in Bible study to try to dive into a subject that might be controversial or might be different, some people have different opinions. Let's go ahead and lay out what we know. Then we can figure out where does this other part go. And so just having that overall story in mind does seem to be really helpful. And just kind of building on that, what you think maybe are some common mistakes, some things we might do in our Bible study that can get us going down the wrong road?
Yeah, I think maybe one of the big things that you have to study in some sort of order. And I think I think that works for some people, like talking about like reading through the Bible just front to back. I think that works for some people. And for some people it doesn't. But that you have to do it in some sort of order. And I think that's a mistake sometimes we make. And especially in beginning, like if you're starting out on this journey, or, maybe you've been on it a while, but you just haven't really been able to get any real traction on like becoming passionate about studying Scripture. Sometimes you just have to study what you're interested in or motivated to study right now.
Yeah.
And eventually maybe that motivation changes. And so you move to a new book or topic. and you spend some time there. But I think feeling pressure to do it in some sort of order is maybe not super helpful. And also, I think we maybe have some tendencies to want to read the harder things first.
Mm-hmm.
I can remember being younger, even in high school, as I'm starting out and thinking, I'm going to read Revelations,
Right.
and that seems really cool to me.
Yeah, just go ahead and figure that one out. Then we get to the rest.
Yeah, the rest ought to be easy if I can get that. And I think I did that wrong for a long time. That I would pick it up and I would go to Revelation or even Psalms is difficult, or Isaiah. And where it changed for me is that I realized there's so much narrative in the Bible, and by narrative I just mean storytelling.
Right.
And of course we live in a world of narrative. We are living out a narrative, and so it's a type of scripture that is easier for us to, I think, take in. It reads like a storybook. And I think that was what changed with me reading through Genesis and Exodus and connecting those things, was realizing like, wow, there's a big story here. It's like the greatest movie series of all time, whether it's, The Lord of the Rings or Harry Potter or whatever big series that you have. And it's like, oh, wow, this is a big, long story that's interconnected. So I think that's helpful. Just early on, sticking to the narrative things, Genesis, Exodus, Samuel, Kings, the Gospels. It's, I think, easier to keep your motivation up with those sort of things.
Well, and I really like the advice of not feeling obligated that you have to do things a certain way, because you mentioned trying to read the Bible through in a year. I've had this experience, and I know other people that have had this experience, that you set out to do that, and then something happens along the way, and you get behind, and then then it becomes a thing. You feel so overwhelmed by it and so guilty about it. And then that discourages you from even doing, well, what's the point? And so, now instead of reading, now it's become this thing that, because I thought in my mind I had to do it a certain way, I'm putting all this pressure. But yeah, I like that idea about finding what your passion, what books of the Bible are you interested in and passionate about, and then sticking with that narrative. And I think it helps us in books like Leviticus, for example, if we know the narrative well enough, we can say, okay, this is a different kind of writing, but maybe if I look at this as it's happening in the middle of God showing his people how he can live with them, and it's happening in the middle of what I've been reading in Exodus, and I can put that in the context of the narrative, it still might be a little bit dry reading through all this and trying to figure out all the different standards and measurements and how things were built. But at least, like we talked about, you've got that place for it. You've got a place to kind of hang it in your mind of okay, here's where this happened. Especially since you get to the Old Testament and not everything's in chronological order. I mean, there are narratives that are, but then you've got a place, where do all the minor prophets line up with the major prophets, line up with the history of Israel, and so knowing that narrative really becomes a key to unlocking a lot of those.
Yeah, it does. And I think that's the whole point of building that puzzle out, that you're getting those sections that you do know down, and then the rest of it you're trying to fit in where you can, and sometimes it takes a long time. Some of the more difficult things you'll, I think, eventually be ready for, and whether it is Revelation or apocalyptic Daniel or Isaiah, and I know I've had this conversation with you before that Isaiah has always kind of been my enigma, that every couple of years I revisit it and I think, well, maybe now I'm at a point that I can understand Isaiah, and I go back through and I read it again, and I'm still not there yet. But I think that's okay for us, and I think eventually I will be at a point that I can understand it.
Yeah.
And, whenever that motivation comes up, I feed into it and I read Isaiah, and I may not get any more out of it this time than the last time, but somewhere, maybe even just a small thing, just one tiny puzzle piece went into place.
Mm-hmm.
And eventually, over years and years of study, more of those puzzle pieces will come into place. And maybe eventually I'll live long enough to understand.
Right. Well, I also think that's probably a sign of inspiration or evidence of inspiration, because there aren't any other pieces of writing that we can do that to. There's a quote about the Gospel of John. Someone described it as waters that are shallow enough for a child to wade in and deep enough for an elephant to swim in. And I think that's a really good way to think about Scripture, that I can go to it and I can learn a lot my first time reading the gospel, but I can learn a lot my 101st time reading it.
Yeah.
And just how that there's no other book like that, and how that's maybe one of those, not a scientific evidence for inspiration, but I think like a pragmatic, like in our lives evidence of there's no other book that could continually teach us this way, in that constant way.
Yeah.
And so we've talked about what to avoid. If you were talking to someone who was kind of starting on their journey of studying the Bible, what advice would you give? What would you tell them? What would they need to know kind of on this journey?
Well, a few things. First, don't allow yourself to get bogged down in a specific book or topic or subject or whatever it is. It's okay if you're feeling bogged down to go to something else for now. There will be a time to come back to it. But don't get bogged down and just feel like, well, I have to stay here until I understand this. And maybe it's a whole book. Maybe it's just a chapter or a passage or a verse. And maybe you stay on it for a little bit of time and you realize, well, I'm not getting anywhere with this. And so you move past it. The book, the verse, the chapter, and eventually you'll come back to it. But it's okay. We're looking at the bigger picture overall. And I think about art or paintings by Monet, and there's a famous painting, Impression Sunrise, in which case if you just look at the painting and this is a lot of Monet, but you just think, well, this is just a fuzzy picture. I don't see what's going on here. And if you look at that particular painting, you may think, well, I see some water and a boat on the water, but it takes some time to dwell in it, to really draw out the intricacies, to realize, oh wait, no, on the water, the sunrise is reflecting off of it, and in the background, I see ships off in the fog that are preparing for the day to go out fishing, and there's trees, and the trees are reflecting off of the rippled water, and you build this appreciation for all of the intricacies that are in the painting because you spent time dwelling over the whole thing instead of just getting bogged down and looking and saying, well, it's too foggy. I can't understand it, and you walk away from it. Well, Scripture's like that I think at first, a lot of times it just seems like a hazy painting, and it takes time, spending time to draw out those intricacies and the appreciation of what a beautiful thing that it really is. And I think also on your point of like why do it, or what advice would I give? Scripture is really good about explaining to you why certain unfair things have happened to you in your past. On top of that, Scripture is really good at preparing you for the unfair things that are going to happen to you in the future. And I truly believe, I'm passionate about the belief that the more time we spend in Scripture, we're increasing our odds of spiritual survival over the long run. At some point in our life, or multiple points in our life, Satan will come for us. And it is Scripture that is our best defense against Satan. It's what Jesus himself used as a defense against Satan. And the more that we prepare ourselves, the more equipped we are to survive those spiritual attacks whenever they do come.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's such a great reminder that what we're studying isn't separate from our lives. They don't exist in two different worlds. It affects our lives. And if we want to prepare ourselves for what's happening, that's going to happen through his word. So I really appreciate you sharing that. Before we wrap up, is there anything else that either I didn't ask that you wish I would have asked, or something else that's been on your mind about this? I always want to give kind of a last minute chance to make sure I haven't missed anything.
No, I think the key principle is just don't give up on yourself for understanding Scripture. It was written literally for all of us, from the person that is incredibly intelligent to the person that's not, and for all of us to understand and to have a chance to understand. So there is something in there for all of us, and we are all equipped to be able to understand it. It takes time and it takes hard work, but it will change your life. It'll change your eternity.
Awesome. Absolutely. I appreciate you sharing that with us, and I appreciate you all for joining us in Connections. We hope this has been encouraging to us, and we hope this is maybe an encouragement to sit down and to study the Bible. Maybe that's something you haven't been doing, or maybe that's something that's been on your mind. Hopefully some of the things here can encourage you to do that. Obviously, if you're in the Murray County area and you have any questions, we'd love to help in any way we can. We love studying the Bible with people at Graymere, and we'd love for you to worship with us. You're always welcome there. But we also hope that this can be an encouragement even to those of us who are Christians to keep digging into the Word and keep learning from it. We appreciate you spending time with us in Connections. Thank you for being part of Connections. We hope it was an encouragement to you. If you live in the Columbia area and don't have a church home, we would love for you to worship with us. You can find out information about meeting times, classes, and what to expect at graymere.com. You will always receive a warm welcome from the